and welcome to the Kink Perspective. My name's Chris. I'm a psychotherapist and consultant. Today, we're going to look at something that I think has gotten to the point where it's so blended and inside of the lifestyle, there's no more separation of the two. And it carries a lot of weight. I think we're at the point where we don't even understand where the separation is. Now, a lot of the times here, we're talking about relationships and all of these things and trauma and attachment patterns. But today, we are going to discuss what happens when intimacy is present inside of a TPS dynamic or basically any type of dynamic inside of the lifestyle, but sex is not present. Specifically, what brings up inside people, right? What does it do inside of us when the usual structure that they rely on is taken away? Now, a few days ago, I kind of ran a poll on social media and I asked people what topic they really wanted me to kind of cover next. And I did, I presented a few options and this one stood out clearly, right? Intimacy and vulnerability without sex inside of our scenes. And I want to be clear because over the years and in my writings and in discussions, I have always stood on the hill, and I'm not wrong. BDSM and sex are not synonymous, right? And the result of this poll here showed that this is really something people want to talk about, not because this is a new subject, but because it points to something that a lot of people are already wrestling with in their own experiences or dynamics, or when they're even starting to negotiate. Now, before I get into this, I want to, like I always do, I want to thank every one of you who continues to listen, to share, to discuss the show from Vienna to Copenhagen. I hear you. I see you from St. Louis. Thank you for your email. All the way down to Caracas and out there in Perth. All of you around the world, I appreciate it, right? So if these conversations are useful to you, do me a favor, rate this show on Spotify. Go over, if you're using the app, hit it 5 stars, or if you're on YouTube and you're following along, hit the like, the subscribe button, hit that little follow button. That way, when new shows come out, you're going to know, right? If you'd like to support the show directly, there is a donation link in the show's description. Every little bit of support helps keep doing the work that I'm doing here for you all. Now, what I want to explore today is a simple question that turns out to be more uncomfortable than it actually sounds, right? What happens to a scene when sex gets removed, but intimacy is not? Now, for a lot of people, sex provides a structure that makes closeness feel manageable. It offers a script, a direction, and definitely a clear endpoint. When that's taken away, people are often left to face, each other with presence and vulnerability and their own capacity to stay with that. So today, this isn't about doing scenes differently or doing them better. It's about paying attention to what shows up when the usual organizing force is no longer there, right? So what do people usually mean by intimacy in kink? And this is where we're going to start. So when people talk about intimacy and kink, they're usually not talking about the same thing. They use the word intimacy, but they're often, pointing to intensity or sexual charge or, how far we can push things. Those things get bundled together so tightly that they start to feel interchangeable. So if a scene is intense enough, it must be intimate. There must be a lot of sexual energy. That definitely must mean that there's closeness. So if things escalate, if there's a build, right, then something meaningful has to happen. And sometimes it is, right? But that equation isn't as solid as people think. Intensity is about sensation and nervous system activation. Sexual charge is about arousal and anticipation. And escalation is about momentum. None of those automatically require emotional exposure. You can have all three and still stay very well protected on the inside. And from a psychological standpoint here, intimacy is not stimulation, it's exposure. It's the experience of being seen or affected or even known by another person in a way that actually registers on a deeper level, not just in the body, but internally. And that's the key difference that matters. Now, in Kink, our roles, our protocols, the structures that do a lot of our heavy lifting are already present. They create that clarity for us and they define our expectations. They tell people who they are supposed to be when they're in the room. That can feel incredibly grounding, especially for people who struggle with ambiguity or relational uncertainty. Structure can absolutely create safety. There's nothing wrong with that. And that's not what I'm saying. And in fact, for a lot of people, it's what makes kink accessible at all. But safety and intimacy are not the same thing. You can follow a role perfectly and never let yourself be seen. And I've discussed this in the past. And you can execute protocol flawlessly, but remain emotionally untouched, right? And you can surrender your behavior while staying psychologically guarded. Those things don't cancel each other out. What often gets missed here is that roles give people a place to stand, but those roles don't require people to step forward. Now, that's not a criticism, it's just a limit. And a lot of scenes function as highly controlled environments where the rules and the power exchange and the erotic ideas and focus allow people to feel something without having to reveal too much. So the structure here holds, so the meaning and people inside of it don't have to, right? And again, that can be useful and it can even be stabilizing. It can even be healing in certain contexts, but it's not the same as intimacy. Intimacy is, in the psychological sense here, involves risk, not physical, but emotional. And that risk, you know, maybe you're worried about somebody actually seeing you or responding to you, or even, failing to respond to you in a way that matters. It involves allowing someone else to be there, be present, and that presence to actually land. And that's a very different demand than tolerating sensation or playing a role. And this is where people sometimes get defensive. So I want to be careful and clear about all of this. I'm not saying that scenes without emotional exposure are shallow or fake. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that they're just doing a different job, and that job has limits. You can have a scene that is deeply meaningful in terms of power and trust and embodiment and still not be emotionally intimate. You can also have scenes that feel intimate because they are intense, not because anyone is actually being seen. That distinction becomes important when people start asking more connection or asking for more connection and don't understand why they're still feeling unseen afterwards. Now, if intimacy is defined only by how strong something felt or how far it went, then there's no language for noticing what didn't happen, and there's no way to name that absence because the words aren't present. But the absence here matters because you can walk out of a powerful scene feeling connected to the experience and your role or the dynamic, but still feel alone with yourself. But I don't want you to think that that's a failure. What it actually is information. And the key to hold here is really simple. Even if it's uncomfortable, you can have a powerful scene without being emotionally seen. Yeah, I know those things are kind of running over, right? You can have let's try it this way. You can set up a play and it can be intense and cathartic and all of these things, but no one sees who you are beneath that role, right? So once you recognize that, the rest of the conversation starts to make a lot more sense. But why sex makes vulnerability easier? And let's get into this part here. And this is where things usually click for people. Once you stop thinking about intimacy as just intensity or chemistry, the next question almost asks itself: why does sex make all of this feel easier in the first place? Why does taking sex off the table suddenly stop some people in their tracks? A big part of that is that sex gives you a script. Even when people say they're improvising, they're really not. There's a shared understanding of what comes next and how things usually unfold and where everything's going. That alone takes a lot of pressure off. You don't have to wonder what something means because the structure already decided that for you. Sex gives you permission. You're allowed to feel a lot because it's sexual. Strong reactions make sense. Tears, the shaking, the intensity, even attachment can all get waved through because, well, it was a sexual scene. Nobody has to slow down and ask what's actually being touched underneath it. And then there's the ending. Sex comes with a natural stopping point: orgasm, drop, aftercare, or just that shared sense of being done. Even if the feelings are messy, there's a clear moment when you can exhale and come back to yourself. That ending matters more than most people realize. When you take sex away, all of that disappears. There's no built in arc telling you where this is going. There's no automatic justification for why you're feeling something strongly. And there's no clean exit that says, hey, we did the thing, now we can relax. So people are left sitting in it. And that's usually when restlessness shows up. People start shifting, they fidget, right? They're looking for the next move, not because anything's wrong, but because stillness without some sort of a roadmap feels exposing. The body wants something to do, and the mind wants a signal. And self consciousness tends to follow right behind it. Thoughts like, am I doing this right? Does it look weird? What does this mean? Start creeping in. And without sex to organize the moment, people have to tolerate being seen without knowing how they're being read. And anxiety about meaning is truly a big one. When there's no sexual context to lean on, every reaction can start to feel like it's, loaded. A pause feels heavier, eye contact feels louder, touch feels harder to interpret. So people try to figure out what this says about them, about the other person, or even their dynamic. To make a long story short here, the mind goes to work. And then come the urges. The urge to escalate, to add sexual charge back in so things can make sense again, or the urge to shut down completely, right? To pull back, maybe you're going to crack a joke, you're going to check out, or even call it early. Both are ways of getting out from under the exposure. Now, none of this means someone is broken or avoidant or doing kink wrong. It just means sex has been doing emotional labor that often goes unnoticed. It's been carrying the weight of regulation and meaning and containment. So when sex is present, vulnerability gets bundled inside of something familiar. So when sex is gone, vulnerability stands on its own, and that can feel like too much, even for the people who are experienced. And this is where actions speak louder than words. People might say they want intimacy, but when the sexual structure is removed, what actually happens tells you more than any label or intention could. Sex isn't the problem here. It's not the villain. It's been a very effective organizer. And it's helped a lot of people feel close without having to linger in uncertainty. The moment you see that, a lot of reactions suddenly make sense. And why some scenes feel unfinished. Why some connections fade once the sex is gone. Why closeness can feel harder to sustain than intensity. Sex often does emotional labor people don't realize that they're outsourcing. And when it's not there to do that work for you, whatever has been built underneath starts to show. So, here, what non sexual intimacy in scenes actually asks of people. And we're going to get into it. This is going to be the meat of this. This is what I really want to drive in and drive home about, right? When you take sex out of a scene, what's left tends to surprise a lot of people. Not because nothing's happened, but because what is happening feels harder to place. There's no sexual payoff to organize the moment, no arousal curve telling you how intense it's supposed to be, and suddenly the scene is asking something different from you. Scenes built around power without an erotic reward are a good example. Power doesn't disappear when sex does. In some ways, it actually gets louder. There's no pleasure response to hide behind it, no sexual framing to soften what it means to give control or to take it. So you feel the weight of it more directly. Authority lands differently when it isn't wrapped in desire, and so does submission, right? Caretaking without sexual reward works the same way. When care isn't leading somewhere sexual, it stops being performative very quickly. There's no payoff coming that justifies the effort or makes vulnerability feel worthwhile. You're either present with someone or you're not. And that can feel unsettling, especially if you're used to care being part of the larger erotic exchange. And stillness is another one that catches people off guard. A scene built around restraint or quiet presence or even sustained attention can feel deceptively simple. But when nothing is escalating, there's nowhere to go, no distraction, no build to ride. And you're left with your own reactions and other person's awareness of you. And that's where the real demand shows up. Non sexual intimacy asks you for something different. It asks you for tolerance. Tolerance for being seen without knowing what the other person is doing with what they see. Tolerance for staying present with the urge to shift gears kicks in, right? It's not dramatic in any sort of way, but it's not easy either. It also asks for regulation without distraction. When sex isn't there to absorb all that excess emotion, people have to manage their internal state more directly. Nervous energy doesn't get blurred and burned off through the arousal, and anxiety doesn't get smoothed over by escalation. So you have to notice what's happening and stay with it, even if it's uncomfortable. And trust is another piece of the pie that becomes very clear. Trust without guarantee is different from trust backed by sexual script. In sexual scenes, there's often an unspoken promise that intensity will lead somewhere satisfying. When the promise is gone, trust has to stand on its own. You're trusting that the connection, right? And what you're building inside of it, not the outcome of it. Even experienced players can find this confronting. Skill and experience and confidence don't automatically translate here. In fact, people who are very comfortable in sexual scenes sometimes feel more exposed when the sex is removed, because now they got to figure out who they are without it and how that role, now what becomes of that role when it's not present. And they've learned how to navigate a lot of this intensity, but they don't always know how to stay open about it or open without the sex. This is usually where people realize how much sex has been organizing their experience, not just physically, but emotionally. It's been giving intensity a shape or vulnerability or, as a reason, and connection as a destination. So when that structure is gone, intensity doesn't vanish, it just moves. The intensity shifts inward into awareness, into anticipation. It's the space between two people who are both still there with nothing to hide behind it. A hand resting on someone's back can feel heavier than a sexual touch. Silence can feel louder than impact. Eye contact can carry more weight than any explicit act. That's what people often don't expect. They assume removing sex is going to completely flatten the experience, that it's going to make things, calmer or easier. And in reality, it redistributes the intensity instead of reducing it. And that redistribution tells you a lot. It shows you where someone relies on stimulation to stay connected. It shows you where closeness feels tolerable, where it doesn't. It shows you how much capacity there really is for presence when there's no payoff waiting at the end. And none of this is a criticism, it's just information. And I've said this before, if you want to be kinky, which to me is more of your sexualized role playing, that's fine. But there is a difference between doing that and something I do, or the people that I'm with, or a lot of the other people around the world that are involved in the lifestyle do, where there is no sex involved. And I would argue the depths that we go to are emotionally deeper and much more emotionally connected than those who are engaging in sex consistently in their scenes. Not because one form is better or another, and it's not a competition. But I think the depths of what we see here inside of that vulnerability truly matter, right? And I know there's going to be a lot of people going, no, you're wrong. The sex, I can separate the sex and the sex is more. That's fine. If that's what you want to do, there's nothing wrong with that. But then I challenge you to remove it and to sit with that and see what happens, right? Non-sexual intimacy asks more of people internally, not more skill, but more tolerance, right? More willingness to stay put when nothing is actually pulling you forward. And that's why these scenes can feel so exposing and why they work. They can feel deeply connective in a way that doesn't fade once the scene ends. So let's talk about some reactions here and misinterpretations. And this is usually the part where people start second guessing what just happened. Now, they walk away from a non sexual scene, and the first thing out of their mouth is often, I felt awkward. And I hear this a lot. And that sentence tends to carry more judgment, right, than it needs to. Awkward doesn't mean wrong. It means, it doesn't mean unsuccessful, right? Most of the time, it just means unfamiliar. When there's no sexual script to lean on, the body doesn't know where to put itself right away. And that pause can feel strange, even if nothing bad has actually happened. And another common reaction is nothing really happened. Well, that one's especially interesting to me because usually what that means is that nothing distracted you. There was no build, no chase, no release pulling your attention forward. You were just there with someone else. And, that can be exposing. And when you're not used to that, it can register as emptiness instead of presence. And there's also the big pull to bring sex back in right away. Sometimes it gets explained as desire or chemistry or unfinished business. And sometimes, it is. But other times it's about discomfort with closeness that doesn't come with a clear role or outcome. Wanting sex, right away or bringing it back doesn't automatically mean that non sexual connection was lacking. It can mean it asks for something you're not used to giving or you're not ready to. And this is where people often start reaching for labels or moral conclusions. Was the scene bad? Was it pointless? Does this mean I need sex to connect? Does this mean I'm doing kink wrong? That's where things go sideways. This isn't some libertine philosophy here. It's impulse protection. It's the demand for freedom without responsibility and expression without consequence and power without restraint. And none of that's kink culture. And if somebody's trying to talk you into something you're not wanting because they're describing it, this is going to bring your scene to a higher place, that becomes adolescent entitlement dressed up as ideology. And it's important not to turn these reactions into identity statements. Feeling uneasy doesn't make you avoidant. Wanting sex doesn't make you shallow. And feeling exposed doesn't mean you failed some invisible test. All of this is water under the bridge once you start treating reactions as information instead of verdicts. Awkwardness tells you where your edges are. Relentlessness tells you what you rely on to regulate. Wanting to escalate tells you what helps, you feel grounded and connected. None of those are moral flaws. They're signals. And a lot of people get tripped up because they expect sexual intimacy to feel calmer and easier. And when it doesn't, they assume something went wrong. And in reality, what often went wrong is the expectation without sexual momentum and carrying things forward. And every moment asks for more consciousness, and presence in your life. And that can feel heavier, even if nothing negative happened. And another misinterpretation here is assuming that discomfort means disconnection. Sometimes it's the exact opposite. Sometimes discomfort shows up precisely because something has landed, because the other person is actually there with you and there's no buffer. It does take two to tango, but it takes two to stay together and be present. And that's a different skill set. Once people aren't being with each other, seeing each other, right? It can create all of these different things if that buffer isn't there, if that sexual charge and energy is gone, right? The key thing here to hold is simple. Discomfort is always data. It tells you where something was touched, where you hesitated, where you wanted out, or you wanted more. It doesn't tell you what to do next, and it doesn't tell you who you are. Now, if nothing else, this about this conversation here is the whole point is slowing down conclusions that people jump to. You don't have to like every experience, and you don't have to repeat it. But writing it off too quickly usually means that missing something, that missing part, that's what it's trying to show you. Nothing here needs to be fixed. It just needs to be noticed. So before I close this out today, I want to name why this topic mattered enough to win. Why people resonate and voted for this to come in. It wasn't because people are bored with sex, right? And it wasn't because anyone is trying to prove something about kink. It landed because a lot of people are starting to notice a gap between intensity and closeness, between doing scenes and feeling connected once they're over. Now, many people genuinely want intimacy. They want to feel met and known and held in some sort of way. But the only reliable path they've learned to do that is, to find that feeling runs through sex, through some form of escalation, through a shared script that tells them that closeness is allowed and it's supposed to end at the beginning and in conclusion of sex. It's not a flaw. It's a learned route. Sex has been doing a lot of the work. It's given shape to vulnerability and made feelings, legitimate, and kept people from having to sit too long in uncertainty. And when it's there, things make sense. When it's gone, the ground can feel less steady. So today's show isn't about taking anything away. It's not about better scenes or deeper scenes or superior kink. It's not about any of that. It's not about ranking how well people connect. It's about noticing where intimacy actually lives for you and what you rely on to access it. Because once you see that, you get a choice, not pressure, not obligation, just clarity. Nothing here needs fixing. Nothing here means you're broken or you're wrong, but it does hopefully give you something to sit with. Now, last week you all didn't let me down, and I appreciate it. I appreciate all of those. I'm going to say to the parkour person who reached out, thank you. Your words touched me. I hope you got my email back and it spoke to you. So I will continue. You all did what I asked, right? I didn't mean it for it to sound, actually, I guess I did mean it to be an ultimatum. You need to understand, I think I do a lot of this. This is year 5. I ask you these questions because they help me shape other things you want to talk about. So anyway, I'm not going to dwell on that too much. Thank you for all responding. And I wanted you to keep it going, right? Even if you're doing it in silence, some sort of note, some sort of recognition. But here it is. And this is what I want to leave you with today. When there's nothing to perform, nothing to escalate, and nothing to finish with, what happens inside of you when someone is still there with you? That's the question for today. That's what I want to leave you with. Now, a couple things. So I'm not going to go too long. I've had a couple of incidents this week, and I'm going to turn it into a show. I believe I've talked about it in the past, but it's definitely making the rounds on social media. Exposing yourself in public, right? It's not kink shaming. And I'm sorry if you think that I crossed the line, but what you think and how I view things are going to be two different things. And that's okay if we're going to disagree. If you start insulting me and calling me names, the ban hammer's coming out. I banned some guy today who basically said I was kink shaming somebody because what it was is I saw somebody at a restaurant, a fast food restaurant, exposing themselves and blurred out people in the back, which, by the way, doesn't protect you from the law, right? For your content. Doesn't do that. And I'm not even going to tell you who it was because I'm not about the dogpiling. And just because if we're going to think differently, that's fine. If you think that it's okay, I'm pretty sure the law is going to have a different reality for you. And it's not kink. It's not exhibitionism. And it's not a fetish. It's a crime if you do that. And the worst part is, and I want to make this very clear when I said this, and I'm going to get into this when I do this show heavily, but we build this lifestyle around one thing here: consent, right? And consent is not just ongoing. We don't just assume it once. We constantly have to ask for consent. When you take your kink public, if you're at a shopping mall or a restaurant or in your car in a parking lot, right? And you're doing things that your intention is to be caught, that's not hot. It's gross. And don't associate yourself with the lifestyle, because it's not. Because what you're doing is you are taking the public perception, and that's the problem with this. This is the public perception that this is what we all do, right? I'm going to get into all this, I don't know, maybe next week, because I'm still pretty fired up about this. So, to the people who shamed me or attacked me, well, to the daddy Dom in Florida, I think that's where you were. Don't really matter to me. You're blocked and banned, and you'll probably never hear this. Your total approach to the lifestyle, you're the walking. I'm pretty sure you're going to end up being the walking reason why there are a lot more consent violations, and being open about that. Attacking me and calling me names because I don't want to, I believe that consent matters and that you shouldn't be doing that. Pretty sure you're making my case for me, but that's okay. If you disagree with that, if you think you can go in public, and I've reviewed about the laws of about 163 different countries on public indecency, and they all say the same thing: you can't do it. Right? No one's talking about a nudist speech or what you're participating in, or even signing up for Fetlife where that's restricted. If you go where families are, or where children are, or just even other adults who don't consent to see it, it's wrong. I don't agree with it. Right? There's a difference, and that's fine. If you do, that's fine. It's your opinion. And probably neither one of us are going to change each other's mind. But there is a difference. There is a difference. We're not supposed to be exposing each other to each other's kink, right? We don't expose vanillas. The reason why is because they can't consent to seeing it. And doing that, right? That's forcing ourselves upon them. And I'm sure that you're going to, people, if I was to ask people on a serious level, if there's things that they wouldn't want exposed to them, they're going to have something. But, hey, I'm the bad guy here for talking about it, right? I'm the jerk. I'm the a-hole. It is what it is. I'm kind of, I get over a lot of these comments, but this whole "you're famous now" is kind of the way to kind of vent it all out. Anyway, next week I'm going to be looking at something else. I'm going to I don't know if I'm going to go right into the public discussion about public. I really want to, but the other topic that came very close to winning was monogamy and the lifestyle. I don't know if I'm going to do monogamy first, or I'm going to talk about public exposure and calling it kink, right? And I'm really talking about sitting in restaurants like McDonald's or Taco Bell, or going to a shopping center and doing all that stuff, right? Recording it and posting it online, right? So you can do supplemental if you guys want. I might put a poll up if you want to decide between those two. Otherwise, I think it'll be monogamy first, and then I'll get to the public kink thing. Okay? So think about the question. I'm going to repeat it one more time today. I want you all to sit with it, because I don't want to end on a gruff note. So the question is, one more time: if there's nothing to perform, to escalate, nothing to finish with, remove sex from the equation, what happens inside of you when someone is still there and they're still present with you? Reflect on that. I'd love to hear your comments, your emails, your thoughts, all of it. Drop them in the socials. Let's keep the conversation going. Until next time, everybody, be safe, stay kinky.